The most controversial debate in NBA history is obviously the debate about who is the greatest of all time, Michael Jordan or LeBron James. Now, I do my best to stay out of these discussions as much as possible, as I find it too repetitive and kind of annoying at a certain point. But in today's video, I'm sure it's gonna spark a GOAT debate in the comment section, as it usually does when Jordan and LeBron are involved, as I tried to come up with who had the greatest prime in the history of the NBA. Because with so many great players that have come in this league, I think we exclude so much greatness that have been in the NBA to talk about two players that, granted, are great and could be the greatest of all time, but we act like they're the only two great players that have ever played in the history of basketball. And in today's video, I truly want to shed some light on primes that have existed in NBA history that we really don't talk about, and who is the greatest prime of all time. Before we get started though, you guys comment down below, who do you believe is the greatest prime in the history of the NBA? That way, by the end of this video, if you have something different, I hope I convinced you to edit your comment, and I can see it when you edit it, so don't be slick and try to pull a fast one on me. But getting back to the video at hand, when you talk about a prime, obviously let me just define this real quick. A prime is usually the amount of time that you spend being at your best. And when I say at your best, it doesn't mean at your physical best, it doesn't mean at your actual best, but it just means when you're around the time that you're one of the better versions of yourself. And when we're talking about the greatest primes of all time, it usually means that you were either the best player in the NBA, or at bare minimum you were a top 10 player in the NBA. A long time period of you being in that range, I believe, qualifies you to be in this discussion. So off the rip, let's talk about some honorable mentions that could be on this list. For starters, we have Kobe Bryant and Steph Curry. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be bringing up Kobe in the comment section because he has a strong fan base, and the same thing applies to Steph. But in the case of Steph Curry, let me say this. For starters, a lot of the guys that I'm going to bring up on this list played defense at an elite level, and sometimes even a historically elite level. And I can't say the same thing for Steph Curry. And though I believe Curry's peak is definitely a top 5 peak of all time, a prime is a stretch of years, and Curry only has about 6-7 years of MVP caliber play. And it's not like that's a bad thing by any means, but in this discussion, there are guys that have multiple years of elite level play on both sides of the ball, like I said, that supersedes 6 to 7 years. Now, in the case of Kobe Bryant, it's a different discussion. Kobe Bryant has the longevity to be in this conversation for sure, but there are a couple of knocks that I do have against Kobe Bryant. For starters, Kobe was never considered the best player in the NBA clear cut. There were moments that you could definitely argue for him, but there were other guys in contention for that spot. I can't say the same thing for others that are going to be on this list. Not only were those guys definitively the best players in the NBA, but they also did it at an elite level on both sides of the ball, just like Kobe Bryant. And on top of that, they peaked higher than Kobe Bryant in my personal opinion. And now the final honorable mention is Tim Duncan. Now, Tim Duncan has the longevity. He was amazing from literally his rookie year of being a top 10 player, and up until like 2008, 2009, maybe even 2010, I would consider him an elite two-way player, and his defense even stretched out up until he made his last all-defensive team in 2014. But the problem with Duncan is that I don't think he peaked as high as a lot of the guys on this list, and even as high as some of the guys in the top 10 that are below him. What makes Duncan incredible is the longevity of his defense and how much he accomplished in a short period of time coming into the NBA. But as far as the play of his prime and his peak, it doesn't compare to many others on this list, and some of them may even be below him all time. So that then leaves us with 5 contenders for this list: Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Shaquille O'Neal. And by the end of this video, we are going to determine who had the greatest prime in NBA history. Let's kick things off though with the big diesel himself, Shaquille O'Neal. Now, when we talk about Shaq, usually one of the knocks on him is the lack of longevity. And I will admit that in that last year of LA, even though he was still in his prime, after that, it was never really the same with Shaq. He had a really productive 2005 season with the Heat, but in 2006 he was suffering more injuries and he physically could not hold up the same. But I do think that his lack of longevity is somewhat overstated in the NBA community, especially for a big man. This is a guy that went 14 straight years averaging over 20 points per game, and from 1993, his rookie season, up until 2005, he averaged 27 points a game, 12 rebounds, nearly 3 blocks and 3 assists, shooting 58% from the field. That is legit 12 years of elite level play offensively. Now defensively, you could argue in certain years he was a little bit off, especially the 2005 year in Miami and some of the LA years as well. But I think the reason why a lot of people knock Shaq's longevity is a testament to how great he was at his peak. I mean, Shaq in 05 finished top 5 in MVP voting, which he still gets on Steve Nash for stealing that MVP from him allegedly, and he averaged 23 points, 10 rebounds, and 2 blocks on 60% shooting from the field. But yet people say Shaq was washed in Miami because that's just how great he was at his peak in LA. When we talk about the most physically dominant players, Shaq fits that bill in every way, shape, or form. As in 2000, he averaged 30 points a game, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 blocks on 57% shooting from the field. This is one of the seasons that many people believe Shaq should have won the first ever unanimous MVP, but unfortunately there was that one guy who held out that stopped it. Shaq would then go into playoffs though and pick up where he left off, averaging 31, 15, 2 blocks, 3 assists on 57% shooting from the field. Shaq's footwork was very underrated for his position at that time, and then you consider the fact that he was actually a very good passer in the triangle offense with Phil Jackson. And though on the defensive side of the ball, even though he had his lapses with switches and pick and rolls and things of that nature, he was still a very good rim protector and an amazing shot blocker. And combine that with the fact that in the finals, he's arguably the greatest performer ever, averaging 34, 14, 3 assists on 60% shooting from the field, and it's arguably the greatest prime in the history of the NBA. Because mind you, I haven't even touched on his Orlando years. He was so dominant in the first 4 years of his career, making a finals in the process, to the point that when they came out with their top 50 list of all time, he made the list. And even defensively, I would make the argument that he was better in Orlando than he was in LA. That's just my personal opinion. But let's move on to our next contender, and that brings us to Magic Johnson. Now Magic Johnson, similar to Shaquille O'Neal, many people say, oh my god, his career was cut short due to one thing or the other. In the case of Magic, it was obviously him getting infected with HIV. So it's really hard to gauge his prime compared to many others, but considering what he accomplished in a short period of time and how great he was in that period of time, I think he just barely qualifies for this discussion. This is a guy that, yes, you could say he had so much talent around him, but even as Kareem AbdulJabbar started to age, they were still able to win a championship with him averaging less than 15 points a game. Even when Kareem AbdulJabbar retired in 1991, he was able to lead the Lakers to one of the best offenses ever as they still made the finals. People praise James Worthy and Kareem AbdulJabbar for their exploits with the Lakers, and I'm not going to take anything away from them. They were incredible, but Magic's playmaking was truly magic, no pun intended. The man was able to find any type of weakness that the defense leaked out. If it's a missed rotation, no problem, Magic got you. If someone's open on the perimeter, no problem, Magic got you. You want a lob, no problem, Magic got you. You want it in transition, no problem, Magic got you. And I'm not saying other guys in NBA history haven't been able to do it, but if you just go back and watch a full game of the Showtime Lakers, it truly is insane how Magic could see the floor and impact that team so much offensively in order to make them an NBA dynasty. Another thing about Magic's career that's pretty hard to gauge is that he did suffer an injury in 1981 that limited him to only 37 games played, and on top of that, in the first couple of years of his career, he wasn't even playing the point guard position as they had Norm Nixon, so Magic ran the two. But despite that, even in his rookie year, obviously we know he was one of the most impactful rookies of all time, arguably the greatest rookie season in the history of sports if we're being quite honest, because after an amazing rookie campaign, he walks into the postseason and averages 18 points, 11 rebounds, and 9 assists, 3 steals on 52% shooting from the field, and in the final game, obviously without Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he leads them to victory over the Philadelphia 76ers with a 42-point performance along with 15 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, and 1 block on 61% shooting from the field. I decided to include his rookie year as a part of his prime because it includes some of the best performances of his entire career and arguably the greatest single game performance in finals history in Game 6 against the Sixers. As when you look throughout Magic's entire playoff career, it truly is incredible to see the numbers that he was able to put up, averaging 20, 11, and 7 on 52% shooting from the field along with 2 steals and 85% at the free throw line, consistently being the engine to arguably the greatest offense in NBA history in the Showtime Lakers. He was truly the difference between them being a first and second round exit, just a casual playoff team, and them being a dynasty. It truly is incredible when you think about it. Now obviously Magic has his flaws. He is not the greatest defender in the world, even though he was great at getting steals on the ball ball, he could be exploited in a lot of matchups. But considering that he's arguably the greatest offensive player in NBA history, or at least in the discussion, and he has like 10 years of elite level play offensively, I think he deserves to be in this conversation. And when we're talking about peaks in NBA history, I think 87 Magic gets overlooked completely, averaging 24-12 on 52% shooting from the field, along with 2 steals and 6 rebounds, along with 85% at the free throw line. He would win the regular season MVP as he led the Lakers to the best offense in the NBA and 65 wins, would lead his team to the finals and outplay his rival Larry Bird, averaging 26 points, 8 rebounds, 13 assists, 2 steals on 54% shooting from the field and 96% at the free throw line. The things Magic was able to do in his prime to elevate that Lakers team to heights that they never saw before or after him, I think it's worthy of being arguably the greatest prime in the history of the NBA. But while we're talking about the greatest, that then brings me to Michael Jordan himself. I don't have to spend too much time talking about the accomplishments because we all know what Michael Jordan was able to accomplish in his career, especially in his prime. We're talking about one of the greatest defensive players of all time, whether it was getting in passing lanes, locking up on the ball, rotations, switches, hell, even as a shot blocker, he was very good for his position. But offensively, it truly is insane the numbers that Jordan was able to put up while being able to play elite level defense, and it carried over into the playoffs, and in most cases it actually rose. Whether it was him dropping 63 on the Celtics, averaging 40 against the Suns, or having his best playmaking series in the finals against the Lakers, averaging 10 plus assists. To understand just how insane Jordan was in this time period, just look at the numbers on the screen of his regular season stats from 86 to 98 and his playoff stats in the same time span. Combine that with the fact that in the finals he was able to go to it 6 times and not lose any single one of them, going 6-0 in the process with no game 7s, and you truly have arguably the most perfect career in the history of sports, not just basketball. And as far as peak seasons, I don't really know where to begin. You could look at 1988 with Jordan averaging 35, 6 and 6, along with 3 steals on 54% shooting, and in the process of filling up the box score like that, he would make first team All-NBA, first team All-Defense, win the MVP, and win Defensive Player of the Year. In every single area of the game, this man was elite. If you want a year where he's giving you scoring while giving you elite level playmaking, you could look at the 1989 season where he averaged a career high in assists and ran the point guard at the end of the season, putting up a triple-double in the process. But if you want to use the argument that he didn't win a championship or even make the finals in those seasons against him, that's fine. Look no further than the 1996 season. He playmaked very well. He was scoring at an elite level, averaging 30 points a game, did it on 50% shooting from the field, and led his team to a then record of 72 wins. You could pick so many years of Jordan's prime and make a valid argument that that was his peak season. And with a resume like that, it's no surprise why many people, including myself, believe he is the greatest player in the history of the NBA. But one player that gets lost among NBA history, even though he gets brought up among all-time greats but never in the GOAT conversation, is Kareem AbdulJabbar. Now, I won't sit there and act like I've watched every game of Kareem AbdulJabbar's career. Even though I've watched some games, I'm not gonna act like I haven't. Kareem was well before my time in the 70s and 80s where he had his prime. One thing about him that I think only LeBron is in comparison in is his longevity. His longevity is truly incredible. From literally his rookie season up until about 1985 or 86, he was an elite offensive player, or at least borderline. In all those years, we're talking about him going from the best player in the NBA to top 5 player in the NBA to top 10 player in the NBA. And sure, you could say he benefited from Magic Johnson's playmaking, the attention other guys like James Worthy were getting on the roster, but in the closing moments of those games, it was Kareem AbdulJabbar that they went to. Kareem was 40 years old in 1988 when they won the championship. He was barely a double-digit scorer. But in the phantom foul game in the NBA Finals, who did they go to for the last shot against the Pistons? It was Kareem AbdulJabbar, because he had the most unstoppable move in the NBA, which combined with his durability is the biggest reason why he was able to extend his career and prime as long as he did. I mean, we're talking about a guy that when he teamed up with Oscar Robertson later in his career was able to lead them to a championship as a sophomore in the league. Then would go on to have MVP caliber years for over a decade. As from 1970 to 1986, he averaged 26 points a game, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 blocks, and a steal, shooting 56% from the field and 72% at the free throw line. Kareem was excellent on both sides of the ball, being one of the better rim protectors in that time span as well, a decent passer passer out of the high post, and I actually think his passing and playmaking out of the post is a really underrated aspect of his game that contributed to the Lakers having arguably the greatest offense of all time. And I think a lot of people truly forget or don't even know how dominant he was in Milwaukee, as that was his real physical peak, as he averaged 35 points, 17 rebounds, and 5 assists on 57% shooting in his MVP season of 1972. Combine that with the elite defense, leading the Bucks to a 63-win season and being top 5 in offense and defense, while having a supporting cast whose second best player was Oscar Robertson, who was barely even an all-star caliber player at that point. You can truly see how impactful Kareem AbdulJabbar was earlier on in his career, which then carried over to the Showtime Lakers. I think the only true knock on Kareem AbdulJabbar is the fact that his competition wasn't that great. As we all know, in the 70s, that's probably the weakest era of the NBA, or at least in the conversation. And though he was still very good in the 80s, I would even say elite in most of those years, his physical dominance was not the same as it was earlier on in the 70s, which is okay. I mean, the guy was in his 30s. But when you do put context behind Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's dominance back then, you could say he was more so just ahead of his time as compared to certain guys like Magic, LeBron, Jordan, Shaq, who faced tougher competition. But that then brings us to our final player of this video. I was saving the best for last, and as you guessed it, I believe this player had the greatest prime in the history of the NBA that's still going on, and his name obviously is LeBron James. When you look at the check boxes for a prime, LeBron James fills every single box. He's played at an MVP caliber level for almost 2 decades straight. He's one of the all-time great scorers. You could argue a top 5 scorer of all time. He's about to pass Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the all-time scoring list next season. Then you look at his playmaking, and he's one of the top 5 playmakers of all time, high basketball IQ, an amazing passer. You really can't double team him because of it. And on the defensive side of the ball, he's made multiple all-defensive teams, and at his peak defensively, I would label him a top 10 defender of all time. You want accolades? No problem. He's won back-to-back MVPs twice. You want an all-time peak? No problem. He averaged 27, 7, and 8 along with 2 steals on 57% shooting from the field, 41% from 3, and 75% at the free throw line in 2013, leading the Heat to over 60 wins. And then you consider the fact that his numbers rise in the playoffs as compared to the regular season, like in 2018 where he finished second in MVP voting and had an all-time great offensive playoffs, taking a subpar roster to the NBA Finals whose second best player was Kevin Love while averaging 34, 9, and 9 on 54, 34, and 75 shooting splits. You have somebody who's arguably the greatest ceiling raiser of all time and floor raiser of all time. And like I said, when you have that kind of package deal of arguably being the greatest help defender, arguably being the greatest playmaker, and arguably being the greatest scorer, and you do that not only in the regular season but at the highest level to equal 4 championships and 4 finals MVPs for nearly 2 decades, and you're still in your prime at 37 years old and almost led the league in scoring if it wasn't for the amount of games that you missed, I truly don't see how he cannot have the greatest prime in NBA history. I feel like people truly take what LeBron has done in his career for granted. Everywhere he's gone, he has delivered the ultimate prize of a championship and played at a historic level. In Cleveland, he gave them one of the greatest rings of all time. You could argue the greatest ring, coming back from down 3-1 against the 73 Warriors. In Miami, he arguably had the greatest season of all time in 2013, and had it not been for that stupid Melo voter, he would have been the first ever unanimous MVP. Combine that with back-to-back championships and 4 finals appearances in a row, I'd say he held up his end pretty well. Then you look at what he's done in Los Angeles, and so many people are acting like it's been trash when in reality it's been so far the opposite. The man led the league in assists while leading the Lakers to one of the better teams offensively and defensively in the 2020 NBA season, then winning the playoffs and led them to a championship, averaging 28, 11, and 9 along with a steal and a block, shooting 56% from the field and 37% from 3 on nearly 6 attempts a game. Mind you, that was his first year playing the point guard position full time at 35 years old, and this past year at 37, like I said, he almost led the league in scoring. And when you compare LeBron's prime to the other guys that I mentioned in this video, it's very clear that there is a gap between him and a lot of the others. In the case of Shaquille O'Neal, he does not have the longevity of LeBron. If you want to say he peaked higher than LeBron, I really don't have an issue issue with that, but I truly would favor LeBron as a peak, and LeBron was a better defensive player by far. Then you look at Magic Johnson, who simply did not have the longevity of LeBron James, nor did he have the defensive impact that LeBron had, so he's kind of removed from that discussion as compared to LeBron. In the case of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, though Kareem was an amazing player, and I'm not going to knock anything that he accomplished, let's be honest, the competition he had in comparison to guys like LeBron, Jordan, Magic, and Shaq, as I said earlier, it pales, especially considering that a lot of the best players weren't even in the NBA for a good stretch of his career, they were in the ABA. And then you get to Michael Jordan, and honestly, I can't lie, if you take Jordan, I have no problem with that. But the reason I would take LeBron is simply due to longevity, because it's not like the guy is some great all-star caliber player. He is arguably a top 5 player in the NBA right now and is still a superstar. Though you may think that LeBron lacks in accolades as compared to Jordan, they are still very close, and the longevity of LeBron James' career I think makes up for it in this prime discussion. The man has played more games than Michael Jordan in the regular season and playoffs, and has been doing it longer because he came out of high school and is still dominating. So when you look at the body of work that he has shown for almost 2 decades, and the fact that it's still going, and at this rate I truly don't know when it's going to stop, I don't think anybody's prime supersedes LeBron James, and sure, you can make arguments for others, but I think LeBron is in a class of his own. But that concludes this video, you guys. If you enjoyed it, make sure you drop a like. It was a pretty long video, so your like would go a long way to support the channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and bell for post notifications to stay up to date with the latest content on Young Mustard. Follow me on social media. The links are down below in the description box. You guys stay safe and have a blessed day. I'm out. Peace.